Jackie Lou Who, how are you? See, you got the Lou Who this time instead of Vincy because you were first. How's it going? Ah, there's Vincy. Jackie got your Lou Who because you weren't here first. I'm talking to my winners of the ebook winners this weekend. How is everybody? We got a downpour today. Oh, since everybody's not on here yet, I'll go ahead and tell on her because she'll be on here in just a minute. So I called Nina this afternoon after I got off work, like I always do. And it was pouring ass rain around here. And we haven't had rain in like 2 or 3 weeks to speak of. And I said, hey, there's this stuff falling from the sky. It's kind of like when you take a shower, only it's colder. And she's like, what are you talking about? I said, the stuff is falling out of the sky. And I said, it's like when you take a shower, only it's different. And she says, is it like flowers or what? And I said, you're so pretty, Ori. Then I asked her little one, hey, Teddy. Then I asked her little one the same exact thing. I said the same exact thing. And the little one got it right off. The 9-year-old, almost 9-year-old got it. But the almost 41-year-old didn't. It went right over her head. I don't know what I'm going to do with her, Vincy. Don't know what I'm going to do with her. Y'all, this is going to be good tonight. We may all have to go to confessional tomorrow, and I'm Baptist. Vincy, Nina had me laughing so hard yesterday, I literally peed my pants. I had to change my pants. I was drenched. She made me pee my pants yesterday. La pata. Just don't know what I'm going to do with her. It was hilarious. Oh, and another one. So she got up this morning and her mistress says, what were you laughing at? She's like, what are you talking about? He says, you were laughing in your sleep last night. She says, blame it on Mynae. From all that laughing we did on our road trip yesterday. Oh my gosh. It was hilarious. Oh my gosh, y'all. You just don't know. She's been killing me this week. I mean, literally just absolutely killing me. I don't know what I'm going to do with her. Is RJ here? No, I didn't see her. Dana, was RJ planning on being here? It's because she's so pretty. And do you guys know that Little Miss, nobody knows me. I'm not anybody. I'm just somebody behind the scenes. I'm just a paper pusher. Has the most views out of all the videos from Saturday. She's got the most views. So yeah, nobody knows her though. Crazy. Yeah, look, I got my lemonade. I got my fireball. It'll do it. I won't get too crazy with it, y'all. I gotta read as it is. All right, y'all ready for this? I've seen some of RJ's stuff, but I don't think I've ever read it. I've seen it advertised, advertise a lot on our feeds and stuff, but I don't think I've ever read her stuff. Tea with Patrol. Yeah. I usually have vodka in here, but I used all my vodka Saturday. So, all right, trigger warning. All right, let me start off with this. Let me start off with the cover. And if anybody decides to leave, that's okay. I will not be offended, and neither will RJ. She and I discussed this, and we're okay with it because it's not going to be for everybody. So this is called Testaments, a collection of kinky and erotic shorts. All right, there's the cover. Isn't that cover beautiful? I just love that cover. All right. So what she's done is she's gone through and taken characters out of the Bible and twisted them around. I'm gonna read you her So here's her disclaimer. This work contains graphic sexual content intended for adult readers only. The adult fictional characters engage in consensual sex acts of BDSM and those classified as kink or fetish, and occasionally use explicit language that may be offensive to some. Discretion is advised. Sounds like my ever not read, don't it? The people and places of this work are a figment of the imagination of R.J. Castille. Perception of their resemblance and any correlation to real life people, places, or events are purely coincidental. Please, Nina, Ori, do not try any sexual practice in the scope of BDSM, fetish, or kink without the guidance of an experienced professional. Author is not responsible for any loss, harm, injury, or death resulting from the use of information contained in these titles. Trigger warning. The author of this title used certain characters from the Bible to inspire the stories contained within this collection. If fictional characters that explore the notion that people, including the people contained within the pages of the good book, were sexual creatures as human beings truly are, please be forewarned that this collection may offend you. To everyone else, enjoy. I know. Sounds like every other thing. I just want to make everybody aware that it's kind of based very loosely on the Bible. So we did agree on one story, and I get to read the whole story. If she doesn't show up and I have enough time, I may read two. So we'll just kind of go play it by the seat of our pants like we normally do. Forbidden fruit. If I could have, let me go ahead and turn this light on because you guys know it's going to get dark in here in a minute and you won't be able to see me. Ba-da-ba. Okay. If I could have anything, it would be her. Eve Eros was a profound creature, a beauty to behold that rose far above any other. Tall, slender, and my favorite, long blonde hair. falling far below her waist. It was straight and wispy, swaying across her perfect ass as she walked. It was enough to have my cock jumping in my pants, the desire to bury myself inside her almost overwhelming me. Of course, as life would have it, she wasn't exactly available to me. Her father, Eloa, was the owner of the upscale nightclub I worked at as a bouncer. The Garden was the most highly regarded place in the city of Beverly Hills. Only the best of the best were granted entry. That didn't stop me from grabbing a knifeful of Eve and all her perfection every chance that I got. Eve was my forbidden fruit, and I wanted to take a bite. I grew up in the San Gabriel Valley, not far from where I took up roots. After a short stint at the local university, I graduated with my degree in hand. My father argued with me when I settled on a liberal arts degree. He was an accountant and had obviously hoped his only son would follow in his footsteps. Unfortunately for me, or for him, I hated math and numbers and would much rather spend my time writing or dabbling in the arts. What I hadn't paid attention to was that there was more of a need for a technology degree or something in the healthcare industry. I struggled to find a job. The local school districts having their funding cut in recent years narrowed the market even further. I started to get desperate. My parents were threatening to withdraw all financial assistance, and I had to find a way to at least cover my own expenses and fast. That landed me at the Garden. A friend of a friend referred me to the hiring manager, Gabriel, who took a liking to me right away. I suspected that he wanted more from me than I would have ever be willing to give, but I needed the work and was willing to put up with a few flirtatious advances from him if it meant I could keep myself afloat that much longer. When I started working, whew, I ain't put that much. Damn. When I started working, I was in training at first. It took me off guard that, as high class as this place was, it still was subjected to the same rowdy crowds as anywhere else. I suppose the massive amounts of alcohol and endorphins that seemed to permeate the entire room were to blame. The combination of those two substances often brought out the not so nice side of man or woman. Look at someone sideways one too many times, and I would likely be the one to summarily judge you for your actions and forcibly remove you from the garden. I met Eve early one evening while we were gathered around Eloa in a circle, listening to him attempt a motivational speech with an undertone of warning to make sure things continue to go smoothly. The club opened in 2 hours, and Mr. Eros always met with us prior to opening the floodgates and ushering the masses inside. As her father spoke, she wandered into the room. Half the crowd turned their attention to her. Slack-jawed stares of lust and desire followed her path across the space. She came to rest at the bar, helping herself to a shot of top-shelf tequila before resting one arm on the surface. When her eyes found mine across the room, I was sold. Eve held me right then, captive in her gaze, instead of listening to Eloa go on and on about the weak areas he had noticed in the security of the club. Her eyes burned into me. Blue flames danced behind a wicked smile as she raked her gaze down my form. The sound of a throat clearing loudly tore me from her spell. I turned my head to meet the darkness of my boss's stare. His brows knitted together and his mouth drew down sharply in a deep frown. Shifting nervously, why can I not talk, y'all? Nervously. Why is that so hard? Where I stood, all eyes were on me, and I could feel the color rushing to my cheeks. Dang! Somewhere in the room, a soft chuckle from one of the crew broke the silence. I had been caught ogling the big man's daughter, and that was a complete no-no. Adam, are you even listening to me? Eloa demanded an answer with a look. I fumbled for an answer, a quick response, but came up empty. Yes, sorry, sir. Please continue. A round of laughter at my expense drifted through the group, making me turn a deeper shade of red. I begged him to continue for two reasons. Eve was still staring at me, a look of amusement plastered on her plump lips, and I hated being the center of attention. As I was saying, Eloa droned on. I feigned interest in what he was saying, stealing glances at the decadent Eve whenever I could. Her toned thighs went on for days. You know what? So do mine. They just keep going, especially once they get to moving and a jiggling, they just go on for days. Coming to an end at the round curve of her ass, she wore a tight red dress that would make any man lose their mind, leaving very little to the imagination. The hem of the skirt barely covered her tight rear end. What the crap? Why am I doing this? I need some oxygen. I just make it worse. The hem of the skirt barely covered her tight rear end, hugging her curves perfectly. The neckline scooped way down to her navel, sloping down between her voluptuous breasts that pressed together tightly, making me want to slide my tongue down the crevice between them. You fucking wish, bro, one of my coworkers, Daniel, broke through my thoughts. He wore a wide grin on his face, amused by both my antics during the meeting and by my obvious gravitation towards something that put me in danger of a beating by Eloa himself. I had heard when I first started at the garden that he once beat a man so badly he was in the hospital for 3 days for simply putting his hand on her shoulder in a manner Mr. Eros did not approve of. Shut the fuck up, Daniel, I stammered. His ribbing was getting on my last nerve. I can look, can I? I attempted to deflect him, standing taller and trying to look intimidating so he would back off. By the look on his face, my posture made my point clear. Chill, man. I was just fucking with you. Calm down, bro. Daniel put both hands up, palms out, in a gesture of surrender. I relaxed a little and felt a little bad for him for how I had reacted. Daniel was the one who had taken me under his wing when I got there and showed me the ropes. I really had no reason to jump down his throat. I made my rounds, wandering the perimeter of the garden as clusters of people gathered around the room. The dance floor in the center was practically empty, but it was still early and most of the patrons had not consumed enough alcohol yet to throw caution to the wind. My eyes scanned the room as I moved, watching for signs of a situation about to get out of hand. It was 2 hours since we opened and all was well. My break came just in time. I had to pee so bad I could put out a fire. Yeah, that was me yesterday. I leaned in and yelled into Daniel's ear as he watched a group of tipsy girls stumble onto the dance floor and start shaking their asses to the beat. I bet Nina was leading that group. He nodded, acknowledging he understood, his eyes trained on the plump redhead in the middle of the group. Daniel loved a woman with lots of curves. He liked to say it was something to grab onto, and he especially loved redheads. It looked like he hit the mother lode with her. I shook my head as I walked away, realizing that he had found his mark and would spend the rest of the evening reeling her in. The employee restroom was huge and very well done. Dark floors, walls, and furnishings. I often thought it was intentional so that you could use your 10 minutes of freedom relaxing in a dimly lit space to calm your nerves and diffuse a little. It was a single-use bathroom that spanned a good 50 feet. On the wall inside the door, an overstuffed black leather chair sat next to a small table, just enough room to place your beverage so you could do your business. I let my head fall back as I relieved myself, closing my eyes to enjoy a few moments of peace deep in thought. I never even heard the door open. As I stood there answering nature's call, a giggle stopped me dead in my tracks. Spinning around quickly, I barely had time to cover my dick. Already in defensive posture, I was prepared to lay out whoever had walked in on me. When I saw her standing there, my hands dropped slightly. A look of surprise and a sudden embarrassment crossed over my face. Eve, what the fuck? How the hell did you get in here? Even more important was what if we got caught coming out of that room together? If Eloa happened to be coming through the back hallway as we fled, I would be a dead man. Oh, you know. Eve forced an innocent look onto her face, her shoulders drawn up into an exaggerated shrug. My dad owns the joint, and I have access to the keys. I thought I'd come see what you're working with there. She was quite blunt. My jaw dropped and my mouth went completely dry. My blood pulsing loudly in my ears as she reached toward me and ran one finger down my tight t-shirt toward my waistband. I should have gotten out of there and stat, but my feet were glued in place. Instead of fleeing and resisting the pull I felt toward Eve, I just stood there, dumbfounded. She threw her head back and laughed at me, the sound echoing off the walls around us. I did not react. I was still in shock as she moved in, pulling hard at my clothes in a frenzy. Eve moved at a fevered pace, her lips crashing into mine and forcing me backward toward the chair. I did not resist for long, my lust for her taking complete control as my hands found every curve of her body. Before I knew it, my legs hit the chair and I fell backward onto its surface in a huff. Eve wasted no time, dipping down and pulling my jeans down my legs before discarding them in a ball in the corner of the room. Reaching behind, I pulled my shirt over my head as she knelt before me, moving her hands seductively over her body. Standing so slowly, Eve pulled up on her dress. Eve pulled up on her dress, lifting it over her head and tossing it aside. Slowly, she turned and put her body on display for me, bending slightly as her ass came into view. My cock grew harder with each second, the anticipation of what was to come driving me to the brink of insanity. Somehow I knew that Eve could read my mind and knew how much I wanted to be inside her. Eve closed in, slithering across the tile floor, my own personal temptress. She looked up at me as she leaned in, wrapping my length in her grasp, licking me from root to tip. Her eyes never left mine. I felt her swirling her tongue around the tip as I closed my eyes and enjoyed the sensation of her mouth. She pushed my shaft down her throat, moving her tongue down in the back to allow me to slide all the way inside. I moaned aloud as she pulled back and continued to pleasure me. When my cock started to pulse, threatening my release, Eve backed off, smiling up at me as she stood and straddled my lap. She lined my head up with her wet slit, sliding it across her clit before moving it back toward her waiting pussy. She kissed me deeply, our tongues dancing together as she lowered herself slowly onto my hard shaft. Groaning loudly into her mouth, she rocked her hips forward with each thrust as I reached around and grasped at her ass, pushing her down harder. Her tight channel clamped down around my cock, milking it with its own need as Eve started to tremble. Anticipating that she was close to the edge, I reached up and kneaded her firm breast roughly, pinching down on the hard center before closing my mouth over one side. Eve moaned softly, her pace quickening as she leaned over and bit down on my shoulder. I felt her legs stiffen as she tumbled over the cliff, her orgasm taking control of her body as her muffled cries of pleasure reached my ears. When she slowed and released my shoulder, I pushed her up, helping her to a standing position before moving behind her and turning her toward the chair. Eve grasped the back of the chair as I eased my dick inside her, pushing deep into her from behind. I don't know what came over me, but I reached up and took a handful of her hair, wrapping it around my fingers before using it to pull her hard against me. Eve responded delightfully, arching her back against me and allowing me deeper inside. I landed a hard slap on her ass with my free hand, the sound deafening but incredibly arousing. Since she didn't protest, I repeated it. I repeated the action on the other side, watching as her ass welted up where my palm had been. Yes, more. Eve started pushing back against me hard, fucking me instead of the other way around. Her desire was clear. She wanted me to be rough, and I was more than happy to oblige. I pulled back hard on her hair, her head snapping back, forcing a cry from her mouth. I hesitated for a second to make sure I wasn't hurting her before thrusting hard inside her again. You're a bad, dirty girl, aren't you? I surprised myself by saying it out loud. The thought had rolled through my head and not stopped at my lips. Eve did not reply, but bucked her hips against me as I punished her from behind. Her thighs shook violently as I thrust hard and fast, striking her mercilessly with my hand as I rode her closer to the edge. Yes, Adam, fuck me harder. I'm coming. Her voice was music to my ears. I pumped hard and fast as she shattered around my cock. She moaned louder every time I pushed inside her, but my concerns of being discovered had long since been abandoned. Reaching around her, I slid my fingertips across her clit as I continued to ravage her. I wanted the moment to last forever, but knew I was getting close and wanted to feel her come once more before I found my release. Eve spread her thighs wider and arched her back against me, allowing me to continue to stroke her sensitive nub. My fingers danced across her as I pushed into her tightness. I let her hair loose and grabbed at her breast, pinching down on the nipple, causing her to groan. Smacking my hips against her rear, I felt her shudder and she nearly collapsed onto the chair as another orgasm took control of her body. I wrapped my arm around her waist and held her fast, riding out her pleasure as I found my own. My cock jumped inside as her pussy clamped down hard, devouring my seed as it poured. I uttered a loud grunt before nearly collapsing on top of her, our bodies molding together into a mess of sweat and flesh. We both lay there, panting loudly and attempting to regain control of our breathing. From underneath me, Eve finally pushed against me, trying to free herself. She sat up, looking over at me, her lips drawn up into a smile. That was worth it. I knew you were a fantastic fuck since the moment I met you, Adam. I have been waiting a long time for that, and I must say, I was not disappointed. Eve laughed as she pushed up from off the chair and looked around the room. She located her dress and pulled it over her head as I lay, still spent, on the chair, waiting for the feeling to return to my legs. I will most certainly be coming back for more of that, she said pointedly before turning to leave. I watched as she disappeared through the door, my thoughts spinning quickly through my head. Part of me was a little afraid, mostly because if her father found out what I had done, I would be a goner. On the other hand, Eve had come after me, perhaps to be defiant to her old man, but nonetheless, it had been a hell of a good time. The things Eve had done with her mouth, I never could have imagined she could do, and I was smitten. Everything about her fascinated me, but never in a million years would I have bet she wanted me to. Eve Eros was out of my league and completely off limits, but that was something that made her more alluring to me. Besides her delectable body, her perfect face, and beautiful hair, she represented a danger that lurked around every corner, and I found myself longing for more the second she walked out the door. I took a bite of the forbidden fruit and gained new knowledge of the splendor that is Eve. All I can say is that I wanted more and would put everything at risk to have another taste. All right, let's see. Hmm. What you guys think? Okay, let's see where this one goes. It's called Lioness. I must admit, I have a bit of a fetish. Oh, I'm not planning on stopping now, Nina. Raised by strict parents who ruled my life with an iron fist, I rebelled as a young teenager, acting out against everything and purposefully doing the things they said I couldn't. No matter how many times they chastised me, I continued down the road on my journey of misadventures. Somehow, in the middle of that nonsense, I found myself and began to focus on something that I had discovered gave me a great thrill. It literally got me higher than any drug I ever tried, and since it was something my parents would frown upon, I wanted it even more. It is something that I was able to admit out loud for it was not something I was able to admit out loud for fear of being shunned by other young men. But I love to have a woman commanding me. Here you go, Nina. I especially wanted to feel the bite of her whip as she took the angst of her day out on my tender flesh, a craving that never went away. It, in fact, only grew stronger with time. I needed to do something about it before I burst at the seams. Of course, I had indulged in regular vanilla activities with a woman, but it just didn't do it for me. Just when I thought I was doomed to live out my life unfulfilled, I learned of a place where all my fantasies could come true. Late one afternoon, on our second break for the day, one of my best friends, Meshach, told me of a location he had heard of that catered to a man's every desire for a small fee, of course. It was simply called The Den. And from what he knew, I could indulge myself in secret and no one would ever be the wiser. The women who worked there were supposedly the best and were there to act out the very fantasies that a man craved. I was immediately intrigued and wanted to know everything about that establishment that I could. I just knew that I had to experience it for myself. Can you come get me? Can you get me more information, Meshach? I implored him earnestly. I need to see this place. That is for sure. You got it, Daniel. Let me see if I can find out more and I'll get back at you later. Our break was over and we begrudgingly went back to the grind. As I worked, my mind reeled with thoughts of the ideal place to live out my fantasies in private and without concern of discovery. I was beside myself with excitement. 2 weeks later, as he passed me in the corridor, Meshach slipped a single piece of paper into my hand. As soon as I was alone, I opened the neatly folded note and gazed at the writing on the page. It was an address, nothing more. But I knew exactly where the address would lead, and I was ecstatic. I planned on going that weekend and could not wait for the day to arrive when I got to see the den for myself. The work week went on as it always did, slow and torturous. Seconds slid by at a glacial pace, and all the while my thoughts were on a place I could not wait to visit. When quitting time on Friday came, I was the first one at the time clock, poised and ready with my time card in hand. The last minute wound down, and as I watched the number turn, I shoved my card into the slot and placed it in the rack on top. It was dusk by the time I emerged from my home, away from home. The sun bathed the landscape in a warm orange glow as it slowly dipped below the horizon. My car was parked in its usual spot in the employee parking lot. We didn't have assigned spaces, but I was a stickler for being early every morning, so I got my pick of slots, unlike the stragglers who came wandering in a few minutes before their shift was supposed to start. That would be me. I'm the early bird. I turned the key in the door lock and pulled the handle. A rush of heated air billowed out of the cabin, blasting me in the face. It was almost hot enough to be reminiscent of when you check on the meal cooking in your oven. Instead of jumping right in, despite my anxious mindset at the moment, I waited for a moment to allow the car to air out a little. Once inside, I started the engine and waited for it to warm up before backing out of my parking space and heading in the direction of home. That night, as I slept, visions of a hidden place where I could fulfill my needs danced through my head. A blonde dominatrix in a tight vinyl bodice went at me with a leather flogger, the sounds of its crack almost real enough to wake me. I could almost feel the bite of it on my flesh. When I woke the next morning, a smile virtually permanently fixed on my face, I was alive with anticipation. It was Saturday finally, the day in which I could finally be able to witness for myself the grandiose glory that Meshach had been going on about. I almost wished I could fast forward through time to get to that evening. I filled my day with mundane tasks and things I had been putting off for quite some time. The baseboards were a mess, a layer of dust that I could visually see from a distance, and even the walls were coated in a thin layer. I wiped them all down. It did not take long since my apartment was a one bedroom, one bath hole in the wall that if you were walking from one side to the other and blinked, you may run into a wall on the opposite side of the space. It was just me, so it didn't matter much to have much more square footage, not to mention it made it much easier to clean. Alabat, I had been lazy earlier in the year and not performed my annual spring cleaning. At least it gave me something to do to pass the time as I waited for the evening to come. For that, I was thankful. Otherwise, I would have spent the entire day brooding over the fact that it wasn't time to go yet. The day I start cleaning out of boredom will probably be the day hell freezes over. Usually when I clean, it's either a must have got to thing, or I'm fidgety. Day finally gave way to the evening, and I was more than ready to get going. According to my good friend, the place did not open until 8 o'clock, and it was only 6 o'clock. Yet again, I silently wished that I could turn the hands of time manually and force it to move forward 2 hours. My heart was fluttering in anticipation. A nervous energy settled across my shoulders and down my back. Even my stomach was in knots as I stared mindlessly at the television, flipping through shows I wasn't even noticing. Finally, I had burned another 30 minutes and was not inclined to wait any longer. I sighed out loud as I dragged myself toward my bedroom to leisurely prepare for my long awaited adventure. Looking back and forth between the GPS map on my smartphone and the road ahead of me, I wound my way through the tight city streets of downtown in search of the beacon of hope I had been promised. It was confusing looking for anything in that area since there was so many small streets that looked more like dark alleys. They branched off the main road every so often in between intersections with no discernible street sign. I suppose we all should just that know the lay of the land before venturing into the bowels of the city, but I was not as familiar as I should have been. Instead of having adventures with my friends at night or taking the time to even visit the main part of the city I lived in, I worked. It was all about the money, and I needed as much as I could get. Consequently, I was fumbling around at night searching for a location I desperately needed to see. A soft, feminine voice drifted toward me, indicating that I had arrived at my destination. I stopped in the middle of the street and glanced around. Black walls with a single red door right in the middle of it greeted me on the left side of the road, just as my phone had said it would be. No windows, no flashy decorations to call attention to, just one door to walk through, and the world I knew I needed would be mine. It was only a matter of finding a place to park. The streets were lined with no parking anytime signs as I looked around, frustrated with the amount of time it was taking me to find a parking space in the middle of the night. Finally, about a half a block down from the establishment, a sign to a gated parking lot loomed in the distance. For a few dollars, I could park my vehicle inside safely for several hours. Parking hastily in one of the many available stalls, I killed the motor and exited my vehicle. Taking a moment to ensure that it was locked, I rushed back toward the building I knew was waiting to show me the way. I stood in front of the door for several moments, unsure of myself and ready to bolt back to the car and drive back home with my tail tucked firmly between my legs. If I chickened out and my friend found out about it, I would never hear the end of it. It was just nerves. I knew that. But part of me wanted to flee. The other part of me wanted desperately to see what was on the other side of that door. Conflicted as I was, I grasped the handle in my hand, twisted, and pulled the door open. Here goes nothing. My mind was in overdrive as I crossed the threshold. A long, darkened hallway stretched out for some distance before coming to a stop at another red door. The corridor was lit enough to allow you to walk through it without running into anything, made to appear as if they were torches flickering in the night, embellished sconces, scones, I'm hungry, I guess. Sconces with fake flames that danced in the darkness lined the hallway in increments. When I reached the door at the end of my path, I hesitated, my hand hovering just above the door handle. Resolved to find out just what the den had to offer, I grasped it and pulled it open. The room was darker than the hallway. Small circular tables were set about the space, and a smattering of patrons were seated at a few of them, nursing a drink. They looked around nervously at me as I breached the entrance, noticed that I was just another customer, and went back to their business. A tall bar lined one entire wall, opposite the entry, with one lone bartender to serve those who wanted a drink. As I stood and took in the sights, the music changed and Alice Cooper's Bed of Nails came on. I was a huge fan of his, and that song seemed highly appropriate for the venue I found myself in. Smiling to myself, I moved slowly inside and found my way to a table on the far side of the room. I sat down and glanced around. A small group chatted nearby, their voices a murmur above the music. When the song reached the chorus and the coop was declaring he would drive you like a hammer on a bed of nails, a tall blonde beauty came into view. Strangely enough, it was the same woman from my dream. Her eyes locked immediately onto mine, and as I watched, she wove her way around several tables, heading straight for me. I held my breath. The sight of her seemed to be unreal. If it would if it wouldn't have looked strange, I would have pinched myself to make sure I wasn't dreaming. Good evening, and welcome to the den. Her voice was as smooth as satin. I am Susanna. How are you this fine night? She was making small talk, feeling me out. It was probably written all over my face how anxious I was. I hoped I did not appear as out of place as I felt. My mouth was impossibly dry, and I opened it to speak, but what came out was more of a croak than a greeting. Fumbling around the surface of the small table, I folded my drink in my hand and tipped it to my lips, taking several long swallows before putting it back down and regarding Susanna as she stood towering above me. Something in the way she looked at me had me instantly thrilled. Her long, slender legs went on for days, partially covered in fishnet thigh high stockings that were held in place by black garter straps. Tall, over the knee patent leather boots with a pointed toe shone in the low lighting. I shuddered as the image of that boot pressing into my groin as Susanna took control of me rushed through the back of my mind. I was trying to appear less eager than I felt, but realized I was failing miserably. A mane of soft golden curls fell around her shoulders, cascading down to her waist. Her eyes pierced me into my soul, even in the darkness, dark pools of mystery. She seemed to be waiting for something, and I suddenly realized how incredibly rude I had been. Susanna had engaged me in conversation, and in my stupor, I had all but dismissed her. If I could, I would have kicked my own ass. Hello, Susanna. My voice wavered slightly as I finally managed to say two words to her. My head was swimming and my heart pounded in my chest. We both knew why I had come, and she seemed ready to pounce. This is your first time here, I can tell. Well, that and I have never seen you here before, and I have been working at the den for many years. Welcome. Don't worry, we will take good care of you here. A smile graced her perfect lips, stretching across rows of pearly white teeth. Susanna reached out and gently placed her hand on my shoulder. The energy she provided me was enough to ground me. The world no longer spinning, I cleared my throat and prepared a response. I've never done anything like this before. I started to ramble. As I spoke, I was embarrassed with myself, falling all over myself at the very thought of what Susanna could do for me. It had never even been discussed, but I already knew that she would be the one to show me the way. I was almost overcome with the need to bow down at her feet and worship the very ground she walked on. I know, she was matter of fact, no games. What's your name? She looked on unexpectantly, tapping her toes slightly to the music as she waited for my response. I'm, I'm Daniel. It was all that I could manage. My excitement had my tongue tied in knots and my stomach was doing backflips. The anticipation of what was to come was nearly enough to drive me to madness. I wanted nothing more than to beg for her mercy as she pummeled me with a heavy paddle or stung my skin with long leather strappings of her flogger. Well, Daniel, she was almost purring as she spoke, her voice soothing as she continued. Let me show you what we're all about here. Susanna held out her hand. Still standing above me proudly, she waited for me to take her hand, turned slowly, and led me in the direction of a tall, arched entryway. She did not stop there. Rather, she crossed through into the darkness on the other side with me in tow. As we left the main room, I happened to glance up at a large sign on the wall, a lion's head in the center of a shield shaped piece of metal. Our mouths are sealed, it stated simply. I breathed a sigh of relief at the idea as Susanna's tugged on my hand and pulled me onward. We entered a small room. It was light enough to see. Soft candlelit light flickered throughout the space, causing the shadows to dance across the walls around us. Susanna turned and regarded me, a serious look on her face. She nodded in the direction of a tall, X-shaped St. Andrew's cross against the opposite wall. The sight of the contraption filled me with excitement and a sense of anxiety simultaneously. I stood in place, my breath caught in my chest as I waited to be shown the way. I'm going to need you to remove your clothes, Daniel. Her voice was suddenly. Oh, well, let me go back here. I'm going to need you to remove your clothes, Daniel. Her voice was suddenly commanding, transitioning from the soft sensuality I sensed before. Without argument, I obeyed her command. I pulled my shirt over my head, used my toes to push my shoes off, and shoved my pants down to my ankles before kicking them to the side. Crouching down low, I slipped my socks free and stood again, clad only in my underwear. Susanna gestured at me, pointing toward the lone garment and lowering her finger, indicating to remove them as well. I felt my face flush. The slight tinge of embarrassment shot straight to my chest, heating me from the inside out. I obeyed, of course, hooking my thumbs into the waistband and pulling them down. I tossed them onto the pile of clothes I had discarded and stood up. With my eyes lowered to the floor, I waited for what felt like an eternity as Susanna eyed my naked form. Susanna did not say a word as she crossed the room and stood in front of the rack mounted on the wall to my right. I dared not look up. Instead, I used my peripheral vision to seek out the golden maned beauty who had taken complete control of me the instant she took my hand. And I was not complaining one bit. Trailing long fingers along the handles of several implements of punishment that were hanging there, she appeared to be feeling them out, perhaps sensing the energy of each before choosing the best fit. I saw her wrap her hand around a long handle and pull it free. As she walked toward me, she swung the device in her hand. Long straps of leather trailed almost to the floor as she approached. Oh my gosh. You are to kneel before me while we are here, Daniel. I see your instinct is to not look me in my eyes, which is perfect. I just need to teach you a little more about your role. I knew from the moment I laid eyes on you that you are naturally submissive. But let's work on your posturing. First, I want you on your knees, place your hands behind your neck, and pull your elbows back. To help your balance, you will want to spread your knees slightly and pull your spine up straight. Now let's see that beautiful body. I did as I was commanded. She was right. It was a little difficult to maintain my balance. My muscles quivered with tension as I straightened my back and pulled my elbows back. With my eyes still cast down, I took long, even breaths and concentrated on maintaining the position Susanna had me in. Yes, Susanna. I said it barely a whisper. She looked down at me, her eyes softened a bit before a stern look washed. Did I really just say that? Washed over her face, and they flashed with fiery energy. Sorry, y'all, my mountain's coming out. You will refer to me as mistress, or if you wish, as long as we are in this place, Lioness. You will never call me by my name unless you are instructed to do so. Do you understand? Yes, mistress. She nodded curtly at me before slowly circling around me. Her heels clicked on the tile floor as she made her way back to the front of where I knelt. Susanna used the index finger on her free hand to pull my chin upward. As she lifted my head, I closed my eyes. The thought of looking her in the face after what she had already told me caused me conflicted emotions. Daniel, you may look at me. She sounded calm, her voice soothing. I did as I was told, my eyes meeting hers as she looked down at me. We need to go over the rules before I start. If you find you cannot take any more, you have reached your threshold of pain, you need to use your safe word. Do you have one, or should I assign you one? I shook my head. No, mistress. I had always been curious of the lifestyle I was about to participate in, but had never even thought of a safe word. Of course, having done some research of my own, I knew that was a I knew that was a word that one used to bring the scene to an end. It should be something that would be unique and discernible, not a word that one may utter while in the throes of passion. Stop, don't, no, all words that were immediately off the table. Very well, Susanna stated. If you reach that point, I want you to say lavender. It is my favorite scent and will get my attention. Now, Daniel, move onto your hands and knees like you were crawling on the floor. Remain in place until I instruct you otherwise. She was so matter of fact, it was easy to see why she was in the capacity she held. Nina, I will probably go over 9 o'clock, so just deal with it. Don't be texting me. Don't mess up my concentration. I did as she commanded, settling in with my weight evenly distributed between my arms, focusing on a spot on the floor, a flaw in the tile beneath me. I concentrated on breathing as I saw her begin to move again, out of the corner of my eye. Susanna trailed the ends of the flogger along my spine and down my back as she went. I tensed each time the leather tickled my skin. After several passes, she came to a stop at my right. I heard the sound before I felt it. Whizzing noise reached my ears as the flogger cut through the air. When she landed the first blow, I cried out loud. The stinging sensation she left behind continued long after she withdrew and pulled her arm up over her head to render another strike. The second blow was a little harder. My loud groans escaped my lips before I could stop them. Susanna stopped her work, shook her head slightly, and clucked her tongue against the roof of my mouth. It seems you need some assistance keeping quiet. I have not given you permission to be vocal, my pet. Let me see what I can do about that. I absolutely love the sound of that, my pet. She had designated a nickname for me already, which gave me a sense of joy intermingled with nervous energy as she walked back toward the wall where her various implements of punishment waited to be used. When she made her way back to where I waited, she held something in her hand. Trying to see what it was, I tilted my head to the side and caught a glimpse of the contraption. 2 straps of leather with a large red ball in the center. Susanna stretched them between her hands, making sure I got a good look at it before she shoved the ball into my mouth. Fastening the straps behind my head, she put one finger in between the strap and my head, making sure there was enough give so it didn't cut off my circulation. Satisfied, she stalked around me in a circle once again, the flogger swaying as she stepped. My breathing was now limited, and it took quite an effort to draw in air. Unable to control my own functions, I watched as a drop of drool escaped from behind the rubber ball and fell to the floor beneath me. I was a little embarrassed, but was soon distracted as Susanna began to pummel my flesh with her flogger. Alternating sides, she struck me repeatedly, the leather biting into my skin with each strike. Muffled cries landed on deaf ears as my lioness extracted her punishment onto me. Daniel! I had lost track of time and found a place inside my mind where I was free from pain, completely relaxed in the moment. I had not noticed that Susanna had stopped striking me. I want to see your body stretched out and completely at my mercy. Move toward the St. Andrew's cross over there and do it quickly. I followed suit, crawling quickly on my hands and knees before coming to a stop at the foot of the cross. The sound of my own heartbeat filled my ears as the adrenaline coursed through my body. Susanna guided me to a standing position with my back against the polished wood. She secured my wrist above my head with black cuffs that waited there. When she ensured my arms were fastened tight, she pushed my legs open and did the same thing to my ankles. Taking several steps back, her eyes grazed my body as she took in the sight. A smile stretched across her lips as she drew nearer, close enough to feel her breath on my skin as she whispered in my ear, "Since you will be unable to speak, you will need to signal to tell me you have had enough. Although your resolve is quite impressive, I intend on pushing you to the brink. If you can't handle any more, lift your right foot and twirl it in a circle twice. That will take the place of a safe word in this instance. Susanna stopped speaking and waited for me to respond. I nodded and attempted to answer her, only succeeding in uttering a stifled sentiment. Susanna withdrew, taking 2 steps back, and raised her arm over her head. She brought it down and to the side, causing the trailing ends of the flogger to snap across my exposed abdomen. I felt each strap awakening my nerve endings as she dragged them across my stomach. She repeated the motion, only instead of my abs, she struck my chest. The flogger bit into my flesh, leaving striped patterns in its wake as she readied herself for another blow. Instead of focusing on the pain, I allowed myself to sink back down inside myself. My mind far away, I reveled in the peaceful sensation that washed over me as I spiraled down into a safe place inside my head. I was blissfully helpless, held fast by the cuffs and straps above my head and at my feet, and it was everything I hoped it would be. Susanna struck me repeatedly, doing her best to push me over the edge. Instead, my excitement was evident in the ever increasing rigidity of my cock. It stood up proud and needy, even as she struck it with the flogger, the straps wrapping my length in leather and sliding around as she withdrew for another blow. My head rolled to the side and back again, soft moans escaping around the ball gag every time the flogger made its mark. I closed my eyes, enjoying the tingling of my skin and the fire Susanna ignited. Just when I thought Susanna would punish me forever, she stopped, dropped the flogger on the ground, and wrapped my erection in her hand. She slowly milked my shaft, squeezing and pulling toward the tip. I moaned louder, my hips thrusting forward involuntarily with each stroke of her hand. Susanna smiled at me, her eyes a mixture of lust and joy. I felt my balls draw up tight against her body just before my cock jumped in her hand and spewed forth. My fluids ran down her arm and fell uselessly onto the floor at my feet. Completely spent, I allowed my head to fall forward, my chin coming to rest on my chest as it heaved with each attempt to draw in another breath. Susanna stroked my cheek softly as I came back to earth, floating back down on a cloud of bliss. My eyes fluttered open again and met her gaze before I quickly diverted them to the ground. She reached down and unfastened my ankles before reaching up and freeing my wrist. My arms fell lazily to my side as I leaned hard against Susanna. She eased me down from the cross and guided me toward a small table on the other side of the room. Her arms circled around me as she helped me onto its surface face down. When she began to soothe my wounded flesh with warm oil using small circular motions, I moaned into the ball gag. Oh my, I'm sorry about that, Daniel. She laughed as she unfastened the leather straps that held the gag in place and dropped it onto the table next to me. I totally forgot to remove your gag. There. Now breathe deep and relax while I take care of you. I did as I was told, closing my eyes and shutting out any light in the room. Susanna carried on, applying a generous helping of massage oil to my back, ass, and the backs of my thighs. The substance soothed my wounds. The smell of lavender relaxed me further as she finished up her aftercare. She left me there for several minutes, allowing me to get my bearings. When my breathing had slowed back down to normal pace, Susanna helped me to a seated position. My eyes met hers again. That time, I did not divert my gaze. She smiled warmly at me, her hand stroking my shoulder lovingly as I searched for the floor with my feet. I found my clothes and proceeded to put myself back together. When I was finished, I turned toward Susanna again, who was holding out a bottle of water. You need to hydrate, Daniel. This only t- this takes a lot out of your body. The adrenaline is no doubt still flowing through your veins. In addition to soothing your wounds, you will always need to rehydrate when you are finished. It's like working out, honestly, and you wouldn't do an entire workout without keeping yourself hydrated, would you? I took the bottle from her hand and twisted off the top. Tipping it to my mouth, I took several long draws of the refreshing beverage before lowering it back down. Thank you, mistress. I was genuinely thankful. There was nothing I could say to express how grateful I was to Susanna for showing me the way. I finally had a place to go when I needed to escape reality. Thanks to my good friend Meshach, who introduced me to the den, I had found my mistress, my Lioness, who would always take care of my needs, and I was forever indebted to him. Susanna walked me back out to the main hall. I was refreshed with energy that I had not felt in months. She had given me something invaluable, something I had been searching for, and I wanted to worship at her feet for doing just that. Worthy of my praise, my new mistress was a league above all others. If I had my way, I would get to see her more frequently. As long as I had the means, Susanna would fulfill my darkest need, and I was beyond ecstatic. As I drove home that night, I was floating on a cloud. I barely noticed the pain as the fabric of my clothes scraped against my welted skin. Instead, it served as a reminder of the one person who successfully tapped into my needs. Knowing that it would be our little secret and no one would be the wiser was just phenomenal. Before I left, I made a follow up appointment for the next weekend and would spend my days longing to be at the den, bowing down to my mistress and begging her for mercy. It was a delightful thought. I could not wipe the smile from my face as I pulled into my driveway and back to the real world. Until next time. What you guys think? Whoop whoop. It is free on KU or $2.99 to buy. So tomorrow night we have Lucas Black, Suspension's Reward. I think that's what we're doing. I know it was hot as fuck, wasn't it, Jackie? Oh. Ugh. I did not pour that much in there, but man, Fireball's strong to start with. All right, ladies. I'm so glad you guys enjoyed it. Nina or Vincy, somebody, if you would, get the link and make sure you send it to RJ so that she can see it. And other than that, I guess I will talk to you ladies later. And happy reading. I'm going to lay down now. I'm tired. That wore me out. I'm croaking. Alrighty. Good night, ladies.